Hey all, I'm back again with my A to Z monthlies, where, if you're new to this, every month I take a letter, working down the alphabet, and come up with a top 5 or top 10 list to match that letter, which is going to put some challenges on me when it comes to a little farther down the alphabet. Q, W, Z, those are going to be interesting, but E, today's list, is pretty easy, because today we're doing my top 10 episodes of anime. Now what makes talking about episodes interesting is that they're a unit of measurement. Often what stands out to us in anime are the individual scenes, really evocative moments, or alternatively, whole arcs or larger story beats that really sync with us as the biggest, best part of the series, or the most emotional, or the funniest. But the episode is kind of an arbitrary unit of measure, and so it's really nice to see series that take advantage of that semi-arbitrary unit of measurement to tell a complete story, convey a complete point, or conclude a character beat in a way that takes advantage of that full, larger episode rather than just a couple of minutes, so that it's the entire episode that stands out apart from the rest of the series. This is especially interesting when you're converting a series from another medium, be it a book, or a light novel, or a visual novel, or manga. Their unit of measurements, whether it be chapters or just the entire thing, are not necessarily proportioned to go for a 1-to-1 ratio with an episode, which means that the creators and the people working on the anime have to look at the story beats and go, okay, this is how we're going to break this up. And it's always really nice to see series that don't just sort of deal with the fact that they have to have those, but actually embrace it to really utilize those to make something great and to convey something in a way that adds to the enjoyment. And so that's what we're highlighting today. Welcome, welcome one and all, this is Coriander Stone, and today we're going off of E, my top 10 episodes of anime. And just before we get started, let me give you a quick heads up. This list will contain decent-sized spoilers for D.Gray-Man and K Return of Kings, and absolutely massive spoilers for Madoka Magica and Madoka Magica. So if you want to skip those, here are the time codes on the screen. And with that out of the way, let's get started with my runner-up.
So what's the deal, Kagome? You left without even asking me for...
The Lucky but Two-Timing Scoundrel, episode 160, Inuyasha. Inuyasha was my first anime, and so there were a lot of episodes that stood out to me simply because they represented story mediums that I had never experienced before and themes that I was unfamiliar with. But one that continued to stand out for me, even after I'd watched a lot more anime and was way more familiar with the shonen formula and the tropes that the show represented, was this episode, and that was because, even to this day, it still just makes me laugh. The Lucky but Two-Timing Scoundrel is one of the best comedy episodes I've ever seen, and it's Inuyasha's best comedy episode. Yes, the jokes are the same ones we've been retreading all series, but that's kind of the slapstick fun with Inuyasha. It's never trying to be original, it's just really funny, and we get to see those jokes implemented in all sorts of new and ridiculous ways. We're always in for lots of shenanigans at a good time whenever Inuyasha's in the real world, and getting to see him interact with Kagome's brother and trying to fix her bicycle and pulling all these stunts is just really funny. And then finally getting to have Inuyasha's introduction to Kagome's school friends, which has been kind of joked along as something that would be really funny to happen for basically the entire series, is just the icing on top of the cake, especially how much Kagome freaks out and how much they completely misinterpret everything about all of his comments and the entire situation. Inuyasha isn't a show that brings anything new to the table, but it is something that brings a lot of heart and just a general good time, and when I'm looking for that, when I go back to the show to rewatch something, this episode is always the first thing I think of, and it never fails to get a smile out of me. And with the number of times I've watched it over the last 9 years, I have to say that that's pretty damn impressive. And speaking of impressive comedy, number 10.
Go Rebsi to tears. Aight, schools!
Okay, you two. Behave yourselves.
The Devil Arrives in Sasuzuka, Episode 1, The Devil's a Part-Timer. Devil's a Part-Timer is probably my favorite anime comedy, and this definitely my favorite episode in it. While there are a ton of good moments, this is the one that really shows us what we're in for as a show. And the other moments are exactly that, moments, whereas this is one full episode that's just non-stop, side-splitting laughter from start to finish. It introduces us to the ridiculous premise in some of the most fun ways possible, and spends the entire episode just sort of basking in the hilarity of the situation. Everything from the titular devil getting his infamous part-time job at the McDonald's down the street to the final plot reveal with the hero Amelia is played off with a po-faced seriousness that only adds to its comedic gold, and the whole thing just wraps up the gut punch of laughter that had me sitting down to binge the rest of the show immediately. It's easily one of the funniest episodes of anime I've ever seen, and just like the Lucky But Tea-Timing Scoundrel, has me laughing every time I see it. Number 9.
ごめんなさい、ペアと。私、悪い女だったの。
Switching gears away from comedy and into the more mysterious side of things, we have Dancy Conspiracy, Episode 2 of Princess Principal. Episode 1 had an intriguing view of spies and subterfuge, which had me very much interested from the word go, but Episode 2 is what fleshed the series out for me and gave it the sort of weight that made me want to keep going, and really, really made me love it. For one thing, it explains the age thing. Oh, of course, this is anime. Ergo, of course, all our spies are high school girls. Duh. That's a complete no-brainer. But you know what would be nice? If a show actually had a reason for being set in high school other than, hey, high school. We're an anime, so we do high school. And you know what? This one actually does. One of the things I love most about this episode is the fact that it makes the ages and appearances of these girls make total sense. The roles they serve, all of it, makes sense within the universe, and that's something that is so unusual in anime. And speaking of the universe, it really fleshes that out. And the intrigue. It fleshes out the characters too. The princess goes from being this sort of nondescript nice person we met in episode 1 to a character with her own baggage and her own agenda. It also consists of a really interesting story about how the squad began to form, as we see Dorothy and Anji infiltrating the palace to carry out a mission. Part of what's great about Princess Principal is that, as an anime original series, every mission is sized to be a perfect size per episode, so that every episode develops the characters and builds the world while also delivering a complete story. That's really taking advantage of the episodic nature of anime as opposed to another form, and that really shines here since we have this sort of almost standalone story of a spy mission that is also used to flesh out the characters and give us the background of the setup for this whole series. We really get to see the team forming together as opposed to just sort of seeing it in a couple of offhand flashbacks. And what really made this episode shine for me is not only does it give us a lot more information about the characters and the world and a really fun mission, but its ending has a really great twist that makes you go back and reevaluate the entire episode and made me go back and watch it again just watching it in the new light given this new information. This is the episode that showed me that Anji wasn't the only interesting character in the series, and the episode that made me fall in love with the show as a whole, and for that reason, it is well earned a place on this list. Number 8.
So much for self-restraint. You see, I only have so much patience.
Fury Tidal, Episode 38, D.Gray-Man. Honestly, there are probably better episodes of D.Gray-Man that I could have chosen. There are several amazing ones in the second season, well more than there are in the first, and then almost every episode of Hallow is a masterpiece in and of itself. But the reason I chose this is because this was one of the 3 episodes that really made the first season work. This, along with episode 26, The Beginning of the End, and Silent Coffins, which is the episode just following this one, are the reason that I put up with some of the more weak moments of D.Gray-Man's initial season. Yes, I'm absolutely talking about the Lulu Bell arc, and are what made me walk away from the show's first season with a really good impression of it, despite the fact that I wasn't going to sit down and watch the second one. Which was a huge mistake since D.Gray-Man really takes off in season 2, but I'll get there later. Fury Title is, for all intents and purposes, the climax of season 1. Yes, there's a whole nother arc after it, but since that arc is the Lulu Bell arc, and we do not talk about the Lulu Bell arc, it's the climax of season 1. And as the climax, it breaks a ton of conventions and also really sets up what D.Gray-Man's about as a series. First off, the main character, Alan, is nowhere in sight. The exorcists taking the lead in the siege of Barcelona are the Fury Title unit, Yukanda, who is a main character, and two new characters, Deja Berry and Mari. What really stuck out to me, beyond the fact that the series was comfortable having an entire action climax without the protagonist, was the real way in which this series handles the show. That is, this isn't some high action energy set piece where the main characters show up just in time, they save the day, and everything's wonderful. No. The show cuts back and forth between the Finders in their desperate attempt to hold the city of Barcelona against the Akuma, and the Exorcist's desperate attempts to get there in time to save at least some of the Finders and the civilians. And some is the key word. A lot of Finders, including named characters, die before the Exorcists even reach the city. And when they do, the fight doesn't just end. The Exorcists are still outmatched, and their best chance is to batten down for the night and just barely manage to keep the people in the city alive. And holding Barcelona comes at a real cost when Deja encounters Tiki and challenges him before Deja realizes that Tiki is of the clan of Noah. And rather than ending with some action climax, we end with this chilling moment.
I'm really going to enjoy killing you.
Deja?
Damn it!
You say something, Deja? Are you there?
And this is the moment when we really come to understand exactly how serious D.Gray-Man is about its stakes. We'd already had one major death, the death of General Jaeger, in the beginning of the end, but after General Jaeger's death, it became pretty clear that he was introduced specifically to be a character to kill off, to raise the stakes, and change the game. Whereas Deja was introduced as a new main character. We got to learn something about his past, we got introduced to him as part of the new team, and then this. This is the moment when it hits that this is a series that is serious about its death threats, serious about its antagonist's willingness to kill, and it's serious about the fact that nobody is safe. This is the moment when we get to find out exactly what sort of show we're watching, and the fact that General Jaeger has already been killed means that we realize this as opposed to having to wait to actually see Deja die in the next episode, which of course he does. And the way the episode cuts away right there, instead of showing the fight between Deja and Tiki, just giving us the results, fully uses the segmented episodic format of an anime to ramp up both the tension and the sense of overwhelming dread that becomes a hallmark of the series. Number 7. Kickdown, which is fittingly enough not only number 7 but also episode 7 of K Return of Kings. Kickdown was the moment that we, being the entire K fandom, had been waiting for since the end of season 1. The revelation of the color and identity of the 6th king. The episode begins with the battle that's been hyped up for the entire first half of the season, as well as the movie. The showdown between the protagonists, collectively referred to as the Coffee Table Alliance, Homura, Scepter 4, and White Rice Party, and the antagonists, Jungle. Jungle is out to steal the Dresden Slate, source of all power in the K universe, and the main characters have to all team up to stop them. The stakes were high, the battle animation was gorgeous, and this is generally going to be a fun time. But it also had packed in quite a lot of interesting emotional and plot-related punches. First off, we had Green King, Nagare Hisui, finally unveiling the power that has, like his conflict with the main cast, been hyped up for the entire season. And it is well beyond the range that even the main characters expected. At first, we get to see him just showing off exactly how powerful he is before we get to transition to seeing him go up against Anna, which was awesome because it's the first time we've seen Anna really put her power to combat use. Anna is one of my favorite characters in the K universe, and getting to see her really come into her own as a king in this episode was an incredibly powerful moment for her character and for her arc. I was also really interested in the conversation between her and Nagare, since Anna, like Nagare, is a survivor of the Kugutsu Crater incident and a king, putting them in very similar positions, and yet the two of them have fundamentally disparate viewpoints. It's interesting because Kei's actual protagonist, Yashiro, has a very similar viewpoint to Nagare, who is his foil and antagonist in this season, and so it's really cool that this episode takes the time to highlight the fact that Anna, who should be much more similar to Nagare than Yashiro, since she and Nagare have a lot more in common than Nagare and Yashiro, is actually the person who most fundamentally opposes him, and sure enough, later on in the series, she is the one who ultimately first voices the suggestion that will lead to Nagare's downfall. All of this is great, although probably not enough to top Killer's best episode of the series, but it's all just window dressing. The truth is that all of Nagare's flashy action isn't the big trump card that Jungle's playing, but rather a distraction so that Jungle can play its actual trump card, which, as I already mentioned, is a reveal that everyone's been waiting for the last 2 seasons, and wow, was it well handled. The whole episode is a fabulous blend of straightforward information and misdirection, which manages to deceive not only the characters but also the viewer, only to reveal the truth behind the whole scenario in its last few seconds, making perfect use of that ending moment to make the episode really stand out. And speaking of standing out, number 6. A Battle of Legend, Episode 15, Fate Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works. Like in the case of D.Gray-Man's Fiore title, this episode stands out as much because of some of the lower quality of some of the episodes surrounding it, as it does because of its own strength. Much like D.Gray-Man's first season, UBW is not the best that Fate has ever been. After all, there's an entire series of even better Fate, and it's called Fate Stay Night the original. No, can't even make that joke. It's called Fate Zero. It's Fate Zero. Fate Zero is better than UBW. Now don't get me wrong, I freaking love UBW and it's a really strong show, but there's a level of complexity, of depth, of emotional drama and heartache, and overall looming tragedy that I found so compelling in Zero that is completely absent from Unlimited Blade Works except in the case of this one episode. A Battle of Legend felt to me like it was straight out of Fate Zero, and that's because it more or less was. While it isn't Fate Zero content, it's content directly connected to Fate Zero. This is Ilya's episode, connecting back to the Holy Grail War of Fate Zero, and showing us how that affected her life from that time on. This one episode single-handedly turns Ilya from an evil little child into an incredibly strong, fleshed-out, complicated, three-dimensional character who became one of the best in the series, and it hits several strong emotional beats along the way. The action climax might have been a good 10 episodes away, but this was the emotional climax of the show for me, and that's less an insult to UBW's still very strong writing down the road, and much more a comment on how good this episode was. And then of course there was that ending. Ow. Number 5. Dogma in Egarosphere. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Episode 12, Steins Gate. This right here. This is the moment when things got real. Steins Gate's first 11 episodes are good, don't get me wrong. They had some really strong hooks in there, they had some really nice character moments, they had some good evolution, and it was all the prologue. It was all the prologue to set up this moment. This moment is the moment when the series really starts. And while I was enjoying the show up till this point, this is the moment that really told me that this was a masterpiece. The episode starts with some incredible out-of-universe moments and then delves straight back into the characters and what they're doing, but after that first little setup, everything has a haunting, ominous tone that just builds and builds throughout the episode. From the text that Okabe receives, to Suzuha's tension, every moment just adds to this incredible feeling of tension that's been building slowly throughout the series and now feels like it's coming to a boil. And just as it hits the breaking point, Suzuha panics and the real plot begins. I'm not going to spoil the way that everything changes, but boy does it change, and boy is it good. Number 4.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Eastern Command Center Festival. Incidentally, take a look. My daughter, who turned 3 this year.
Full Metal vs. Flame, Episode 13, Full Metal Alchemist 2003. Remember how I said Devils of Part-Timers' first episode was one of the funniest I'd ever seen? This is why. This is arguably the funniest episode of anime I've ever seen, and Full Metal Alchemist isn't even a comedy. Thing is, that's probably part of the reason that this episode is so damn memorable. It's not packed in between a dozen other comedy-filled episodes, but rather serves as a bright spot on an increasingly dark horizon. Full Metal vs. Flame plays up every comedy aspect it can. And while the humor is definitely the first thing that comes to mind for me in this episode, it's not actually where this episode shines. Rather, this episode shines by using its humor to advance the plot and the character development. For one thing, the foolishness and shenanigans surrounding Fury's attempts to find this lost dog a home gives us our first real chance to spend time with Mustang's team and get to see them interact and get a feel for them each as individual characters instead of just, oh, Mustang squad. And while the fight between Mustang and Ed is played for all of the laughs it possibly can be to great effect, it's actually got some real depth to it since we get a sense for Mustang's PTSD in his hesitation at the end. It also allows Ed and Mustang to have a few minutes to talk. Mustang finally tells Ed about Dr. Marco and in the process receives a great deal of development himself, all of which sets up the next arc and gives us a great feel for where the show's going in terms of delving into the Ishbal War. This episode combines side-splitting humor with dark foreshadowing, strong world building, and great character development for the show's secondary cast into one sleek package. It is just a masterpiece, and if you're one of the people who only watch Brotherhood, you owe it to yourself to go back to 03 to watch this episode, even if you'd watched nothing else from the original anime. Number 3.
敵能力組織を一夜で滅ぼし、総国と呼ばれた黒社会最悪のコンビ。一夜限りの復活だ。
Double Black, Episode 21, Bungo Stray Dogs. It's a commonly understood fact that Dazai is the best character in Bungo Stray Dogs, and consequently, the episode where he finally gets to take spotlight is going to be one of its best episodes. And boy does this episode pack a punch. In my opinion, Bungo Stray Dogs is always at its best when it veers away from the more Atsushi-centered shonen aspects and into its darker, grittier, more seinen underbelly, typically represented by the Port Mafia. The Guild Wars arc has a lot of these moments, but this is the first time we've really gotten to fully immerse in this side of the narrative since the Dark Era flashback episodes. The episode begins with the first ever in-series meeting between Detective Agency Director Fukuzawa and Port Mafia leader Mori Ogai, a meeting which involved a conversation about the psychology of alliance that would have been right at home in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Beyond that, we get our first Port Mafia flashback since Dark Era, this time learning about the coup d'etat that put Mori in charge of the Port Mafia to begin with, and only after that do we dive into the meat of the episode. That is, the agency's attempt to rescue Q from the guild. Mori and Dazai both see a path to alliance, and the result is the return of Double Black, the partnership of Dazai and Chuya, which was the most powerful team that the Port Mafia had at its disposal, or hell, the most powerful team of ability users in all of Yokohama. Not only does this give us a truly epic fight with some interesting twists, revolving around 3 of the show's best characters in Dazai, Chuya, and Lovecraft, but it also gives us some great comedy because Dazai and Chuya hate each other and watching them interact is one of the most entertaining things in the entire series. This episode also gives us one of the best protagonists not killing moments that I've ever seen. See, there's this unspoken rule in fiction that the good guys don't kill. Not ever. This is a trend I don't have much patience for, since the moral high ground is only good for anything while you're still alive, and letting the villain run away, heal their wounds, and come back is a great way to get yourself dead, especially when there's no in-universe reason for this to happen, and it's only because the author doesn't feel comfortable having the good guys kill. However, Bungo Stray Dogs delivers one of the most satisfying reasons for a main character not to kill a character that I've ever seen. Chuya tells Dazai to go ahead and kill Q, but Dazai refuses. Chuya accuses Dazai of getting soft, and Dazai responds that this is his insurance, that as long as Q's alive, Dazai knows he's safe from Port Mafia plotting, and he's right. Q's ability and his unstable personality are a danger not only to his enemies but also to his allies, meaning that if Q is going to stay with the Port Mafia and they want to keep using his abilities, and they do, they need to have a safety measure, some way to counter and cancel him if he goes off the rails, either intentionally or unintentionally, all of which plays back into the fact that Dazai knows that Mori feels threatened by him, which is a huge theme of the episode, which is why Dazai believes that Mori would get rid of him if he could. Far from this being a weak moment of protagonists don't kill because protagonists don't kill, this ends up actually being a strong character beat playing back into the thematics of the episode. And it's the strong writing of moments like this combined with the sheer awesomeness of seeing Dazai finally take center stage and seeing Chuya's full ability that makes this one of my favorite episodes of all time. Number 2.
名乗る必要はない。想像しいやつね。お主の声は1ファルサングも遠くから聞こえておったぞ。
The World-Weary Painter, Episode 4, The Heroic Legend of Arslan. Now, Arslan didn't super catch on, and at least I get some of that because episodes 2 and 3 admittedly leave something to be desired. While they're not bad by any stretch of the imagination, and are certainly as good as it was possible for them to be, the fact was that the show had a lot of ground that needed to just cover in order to get to the meat of the series. And yes, it was predictable. It was setup. But it was predictable setup, and I can see why some people would worry that the show was never going to move beyond its predictability. Or at least I would be able to see that if they weren't booked ended by episodes 1 and 4, which are two of the best anime episodes that I have ever had the pleasure of watching. I'll talk about episode 1 another time, but here let's focus on episode 4, my favorite of the series, and one of the best episodes I've ever seen. Episode 4 seems at first to be a sort of calm before the storm, sit back, relax episodes where the characters get a minute to breathe and take stock of what's happened in episodes 2 and 3 before moving into the continued warfare of the rest of the series. However, for all that, it gets a hell of a lot done. Not only does it have this sort of relaxed setting, but it also covers a lot of ground in terms of explaining the geopolitical situation of the Pars region to the audience, and giving us a bit of a history for the current political and military situation, as well as doing some more general world building. It contains some tragic and emotional beats, as well as a conflict with the men of the treacherous Lord Carlon, and it also has some of the best comedy in the series. Again, Haru Orakawa knows her way around comedy. Just like she did in Fullmetal Alchemist, she applied her deft touch to the Arslan story to really give us some truly hysterical moments. The episode also gives a good deal of development to both Arslan and Daryun, and serves as the introduction for both Aelin and the titular painter, Lord Narcissus. Narcissus being the focal point for the entire episode, and the reason it works because Narcissus is the best character in the show. And despite everything that the episode is trying to accomplish, focusing it around Narcissus allows all the pieces to fall into place. The world building and geopolitical lectures feel natural, engaging, and less like exposition and more like a conversation that these characters would actually have. The pre-existing relationship between Daryun and Narcissus allows Daryun some much-needed character development because we get to see him in more than just the role of Arslan's knight, and Arslan's conversation and offer to Narcissus at the end of the episode really develops his character as well, turning Arslan from this cute, lovable kid who we want to protect into a character who might actually make a genuinely good ruler someday. We also get a really good sense of Narcissus as both a sarcastic and comedic artist, and also as a earnest, clever, quick-witted, and very, very keen-sighted political maneuverer and general tactician. And then there's the fight with Carlon's men.
では帰ってカーランの犬目に伝えてもらおう。腐肉は一人で食え。ナルサスにはまずすぎるとな。貴様。
And if that moment doesn't summarize Narcissus as a character, I don't know what does. But as much as I absolutely love this episode, there is one that I love even more, and it's high time we got there. And that is... Number 1.
My name is Homura Akemi, and it's really nice. I mean, I'm pleased to meet you.
I won't rely on anyone anymore. Episode 10, Puella Magi, Madoka Magica. This is the moment where I go into deep spoilers territory. And this is also the moment when we learn what's actually going on in Madoka Magica. There have been a lot of times when we've had reveals when we thought we knew what was going on, but this is the true truth behind Madoka Magica, and it's the moment when we switch from Madoka as our protagonist to the real protagonist, Homura. Over the course of one episode, we get what is essentially the narrative equivalent of half of Steins Gate or all of Higurashi. We follow Homura from timeline after timeline, seeing her first as a shy, scared girl that we have never seen in the anime before, and watching her evolve from there into the detached individual that we've grown to know. Homura's development, the myriad timelines, all of that fit perfectly into the episode without a single moment feeling rushed. We get the exact sense of how she's changed over the course of this timeline hopping jumps, and we can put the rest of the pieces together based on what we've seen in the timeline we've been spending time in, that is the first 9 episodes of the show. We grow to understand Madoka's dream at the beginning, as well as so many of the other things in the series that haven't quite made sense. But beyond any significance it has in the overarching narrative, this episode is absolutely brilliant just for the way in which it handles Homura's character. The episode tells a complete and tragic story about Homura as she evolves as a character, in a way that makes this episode a perfectly strong standalone bit of time travel fiction, and that's not even including the way in which it fits into the larger narrative, reshaping everything that has come before it. This episode makes for a strong and compelling story whether or not it's taken in context, and that's just the mark of some truly fabulous writing. Plus, it doesn't hurt that I absolutely love Homura. It was this episode that really made Madoka Magica one of my favorite anime, and it absolutely deserves to take the number 1 spot on this list. Speaking of time travel, next week's video, or whenever I get it out, hopefully next week. Yeah, I gotta get back to that weekly schedule. Hopefully. Maybe. We'll see. Anyway, next time's video will be about Steins Gate. Specifically, we are going to be talking about disability and Steins Gate. So that should be interesting. Coming up after that, I do of course have another Legend of the Galactic Heroes video planned, because of course I do, and I've got some other projects in the works beyond that as well, so if you're interested in checking any of those out, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And if you wanted to leave a comment, I would be very curious to find out what your favorite episodes of anime are. I'm really interested to find out what episodes particularly stand out to people and why. And until next time, this is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching. L. Psi Congru.